Hello there, you're watching World 360 on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Over the next half an hour, we'll take you through all the major international stories of the week. Our pivot this week, battle lines are drawn between the West and China. From COVID-19 to maritime aggression, the G7 and NATO have called out China. Beijing on its part has reacted sharply at being cornered. Will this move make China more confrontational, or was a tough line being pushed by US President Joe Biden necessary? We'll have more on that with a special guest this evening, UK Parliamentarian Jeremy Corbyn. But before the deep dive, here are the headlines. It's the West versus China. G7 seeks transparency and NATO calls China a security threat. Beijing reacts sharply, accuses the grouping of malign intentions. COVID-19 Delta variant puts a brake on UK's unlock plan. Prime Minister Boris Johnson delays reopening to 19th July. And the power handshake in Geneva. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin's summit is called constructive even as cyber attack, human rights and Ukraine remain sticking points. The transatlantic military coalition NATO has called China a security threat, and the G7 has cornered China on human rights, maritime aggression and the COVID-19 pandemic. Having been cornered twice in a week publicly by the West, Beijing reacted sharply, especially hitting out at America. Details in this report. 18 crore infections and 39 lakh deaths. The mutating COVID-19 virus has changed the world and economically pushed it into a 1930s-like Great Depression slump. The world is now seeking answers more aggressively than before from one actor, China.
I think China has to start to act more responsibly in terms of international norms on human rights and transparency. We haven't had access to the laboratories to determine whether or not this was a consequence of from the marketplace of a bat and interfacing with animals in the environment that caused this COVID-19, or whether it was an experiment gone awry in a laboratory. It's important to know the answer to that.
The leaders of the G7 countries, despite differences on how to go about it, finally cornered China on the need for a fresh probe into the origins of the coronavirus, human rights violations in Xinjiang, eroding of autonomy of Hong Kong, and its maritime aggression in the South China Sea. NATO allies too joined in, calling China a security threat. It accused China of trying to undermine the global order.
We will address China, and we have seen a convergence of views among allies. We all recognize that China's continued coercive behavior and the growing influence matters for our security, and we need to respond to that together.
A defensive China responded sharply.
中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对。
China strongly deplores and rejects the US-EU summit statement. What the US and the European Union should do is to reflect on the serious problems at home. They are in no position to act as lecturers to other countries.
On the other hand, a UK parliamentary panel report has red-flagged China's creeping capture of international organizations, saying its malign interference needs to be arrested. It underlined the alleged subversion of the World Health Organization, saying,
"It is clear to us that the Chinese government sees influence at the WHO as a significant strategic goal. The Chinese government is considered to exert disproportionate influence in the WHO."
With this, it's clear the battle lines are drawn, and it won't be US President Biden, like his predecessor Trump, waging a lone battle against China. It is the West versus China from here on. CNN's Stephen Jiang is now joining us live from Beijing. Stephen, G7 has sought a fresh probe into the origins of the coronavirus. Has there been any response from China, particularly to whether they are willing to give further access to a WHO probe team wanting to investigate anew?
Maha, the Chinese response has been consistent. They say China has done all it can in terms of helping the WHO's origin tracing effort, and now it's time to investigate other countries, especially pointing a finger at the United States and its military-run biolabs without any concrete evidence. Now, they have also been pushing hard this so-called multiple origin theory. That is, this virus may have emerged from multiple locations around the world at the same time. But the problem for them, of course, is their narrative has not been resonating with much of the rest of the world. So that's why they have grown increasingly frustrated and angry at anyone who suggests or demands further investigations in Wuhan and China. And that, of course, includes the latest statement from the G7. Now, the fact is, a growing number of scientists and experts say, based on the evidence they have seen so far, they simply cannot rule out the Wuhan lab theory. And a WHO team, as you remember, did go into the lab early this year and concluded it was unlikely the virus was leaked from there, but their conclusion was based on conversations with the staff there, not based on any direct access to raw data and samples. That's why a growing number of experts are calling on China to provide unfettered access to these samples and data to independent experts. But this issue, of course, has become extremely politicized, with the U.S. president demanding its intelligence service to do more research and provide an answer to him in August. So given this political climate, it's just increasingly unlikely, if not outright impossible, for China to allow further access to this lab to the WHO. Maha.
Stephen, is China more riled up about the issue of the origin of the coronavirus and the pressure for a probe on that, or the issue which has been mentioned in the statements by G7 and NATO about their maritime aggression?
I think China is just angry at all of the above and then some. Remember, in addition to the issues you mentioned, there is also the alleged human rights abuses in the region of Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, the issue of Taiwan, and also China's trade practices, its alleged cyber attacks, as well as military expansion. So all this whole range of issues are now undergoing criticism from the U.S. and its allies and partners. And this obviously a reflection of this new approach to China adopted by President Biden, who wants to form this united front against China, especially with like-minded Western liberal democracies. This is in sharp contrast to his predecessor, Donald Trump, who preferred to go it alone. So the Chinese are very much aware of Mr. Biden's approach, and they have been lashing out at this, saying these groups, G7 or NATO, are cliques of a small handful of nations that do not represent the views of the majority of the international communities, and that the G7 or NATO statements reflect their Cold War mentality, ideological bias, and a smear campaign against China. So I think what China is likely to do is continue to try to divide and conquer, but also pushing back very hard in terms of their rhetorics. One of the more memorable lines from the Chinese Foreign Ministry in recent days is when a spokesman said the United States is sick. Europeans should take the pulse of Washington and prescribe medicines for the United States to treat its sickness.
Yes, Stephen, many thanks for joining us with all those details from Beijing. We now have with us a UK parliamentarian and former leader of Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, as well. Many thanks, Jeremy, for speaking with us. Starting with the UK Parliamentary Panel report, it makes some rather worrying observations on attempted capture of international organizations by China. How alarming is this that China is trying to subvert the workings of the multilateral platforms? And in particular, the report has indicated the workings of the World Health Organization.
I think there's been a lot of mutterings in the background about the World Health Organization, which I think have been intended to distract from the main issue, and that is that the World Health Organization has not been properly funded for a long time. Its argument that we need universal healthcare globally has often been ignored in favor of those that want to promote private medicine. And the wake-up call should be that we, all countries, properly involve ourselves with the World Health Organization. if there are complaints about one country trying to capture UN organizations, then they're not new. There's been complaints in the past about the US, about the Soviet Union in the past, about Russia, and about China. The UN is there for all of us. International organizations are there for all of us, and they only work if we all contribute to them and participate in them.
You know, but what Joe Biden has projected this in G7 is a fight between democracies and autocracies. Do you believe that is what it is?
I think it's too simplistic, and unfortunately there seems to be a trend by the US administration and to some extent the European Union to try to divide the world into blocks, as though some of them cannot get out of the old Cold War syndrome. I have criticisms of many governments around the world, be they those that would badge themselves as democracies or those that would different, like one-party states and so forth. But surely the issues we all have to face are ones of basic human rights, of environmental disasters, and of the health disaster that the coronavirus has brought to all of us. And so I think we need less of this kind of divisive rhetoric and much more engagement. Engagement to protest about human rights issues, but above all engagement as well on environmental and health issues.
But do you believe that with the kind of pressure that is now being built on China, for instance, this week itself from G7 and then from NATO, China is likely to get more confrontational? If this sort of, as you are saying, blocks are being created and divisive agenda is being created, because there seems to be pressure at the moment on China, not just with regards to the probe into the origins of the coronavirus, but also to cool down their maritime aggression.
Every action has a reaction, and unfortunately that's what we're seeing at the present time. I have concerns about human rights issues in China. I have concerns about what happened and how the coronavirus first came about, which obviously needs to be investigated. But it exists, and we've got to deal with it on a global scale. The idea of building up a military presence by the US and other countries all over South Asia will inevitably lead to an increase in a Chinese military presence, generally speaking, a naval presence all over South Asia. That means billions of dollars of resources are going into weapons, ships, aircraft, which could be much better used dealing with health and environmental issues. And so my concerns are that a development of the rhetoric of the Cold War into a current Cold War with China isn't going to do any of us any good. I'm not saying that as one who wishes to apologize for anything bad that China has done any more than any other country has done. But what I do want to see is a world where we actually confront the reality of the past 2 years, which has been the coronavirus crisis has shown that a number of people, mainly medical companies, have made billions out of the crisis. The majority of the world's population are worse off as a result of it, and the poorest and the most vulnerable as a result of it. And I think we have to recognize that, and the direction the world needs to go surely is dealing with poverty and inequality. You're not going to do that if at the same time you're pumping more and more money into an arms race.
But you do believe, Jeremy, that there is need for transparency from China. Do you think that this is critical at the moment?
Yes, I do think transparency from China is absolutely critical. Transparency on the location of the virus when it first appeared. And they did notify the World Health Organization fairly soon after that. Whether that could have been done quicker or not, I think is a reasonable question to ask. And I do think questions need to be asked about that. But we also have to recognize that China did deal with the effects of the virus quite quickly, particularly in the areas where it grew up. And what we need above all is cooperation. India has suffered terribly from the coronavirus, and it's the poorest people in India that have suffered the most. And so I would hope the rest of the world would recognize that what happened in the spread of corona in India could happen in any other country, and therefore vaccine supplies and handing on of the technology and the patents to enable production of the vaccine in the very considerable production facilities that India has is something that needs to be done as a matter of urgency, because we all need to confront this. We all need to care for each other's health, and that is what I am determined to try to do in my own way in this country and through the global organization that we work through with our own Project for Justice and Peace.
Absolutely. Vaccine equity is critical at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn, many thanks for speaking here with CNN News 18. Now, Jeremy Corbyn there warning that what's happened in India could happen anywhere else as well. In fact, Sanjay Suri is standing by, ready to tell us how the United Kingdom is dealing with the crisis of the new variant Delta. Hi, Sanjay.
Well, we have some expression of optimism after this delay to the lifting of the lockdown. We are told it will be July the 19th now, but can a government really say that? And let's consider after this short break.
Let's now take a look at how the Delta variant that was first, in fact, reported in India is impacting the rest of the world as well at the moment, particularly the United Kingdom. And here is a look at this variant, which has already hit many other countries. Delta is now spurring a global pandemic. In fact, the US CDC has classified it as a variant of concern. Meanwhile, what are the other countries doing about it at the moment? Because the US says the 10% of all COVID cases currently account from the Delta variant that has now been reported there as well. Canada says at least 1,100 cases have been detected from across 10 provinces there in Canada. A matter of concern there as well. Plans to shorten 16-week interval between doses of vaccination for people to have better immunity. UK says a national lockdown will be extended now by 4 weeks, so it's 19th July till when Boris Johnson has said that the lockdown will be on. The vaccine interval here again is being shortened or reduced to 8 weeks approximately for boosting of the antibodies. Meanwhile, Germany says 6% of the cases expected to become a dominant strain now, so a matter of concern in Germany as well. Less than 30% of the adults are fully vaccinated in Germany currently. And France is racing to contain the scattered cases of the Delta variant. Currently in that country, the jab gap has been reduced to 3 to 7 weeks after the first shot. This is to give yet again better immunity. Sanjay Suri is getting us more details now. Sanjay, last week you told us that 91% of the new cases in UK were of the Delta variant. Apart from being more transmissible, has it been more severe as well?
Well, not so far, not on present indications, but the spread itself is worrying, and once it spreads to that extent, a percentage of cases will become very much more serious. The UK is seeing upwards of 10,000 new cases a day being reported, and that number is only set to rise. We are being told that the vaccines are being fairly effective in preventing any serious illness and in curtailing the spread, but we are also learning, and this is really worrying, that of the deaths, and there have been a limited number of deaths only, but of those, a third were of people who have had 2 doses, and the deaths came more than 2 weeks after the second dose. And that's when protection is supposedly at its peak. So if we are seeing that trend already, there are questions and worrying questions.
Naturally.
What may lie ahead?
Naturally. Sanjay, now the lockdown has been extended till the 19th of July in UK. Which sectors have been the worst hit due to the lockdown?
Well, aviation, of course, and travel and everything else around it. Around Heathrow, there's a very, very large Indian community that works around Heathrow. They work in travel, they work in hospitality. Hospitality is another very, very badly affected sector, and these are areas that employ a lot of people. A lot of the economy is about food, going out, eating out, traveling, holidays, and that's a big part of the economy, and the knock-on effect has been huge. But just about every sector has been affected. Manufacturing, to an extent services, there's a knock-on effect down the line.
Absolutely, that's exactly what's happened in India as well. Certain sectors like the hospitality sector being hit there. Sanjay, many thanks for joining us with those details. Let's turn our attention now to the summit in Geneva. US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin had their first face-to-face meeting as presidents in what they both described as very constructive and substantive. The talks lasted for about 3.5 hours. The substance of those talks were about 2.5 hours, with a 1.5-hour meeting in the first instance, and then a 60-minute meeting with an expanded group of aides with them. They discussed a range of issues, from cybersecurity to the treatment of top opposition leader in Russia, Alexei Navalny, to Syria, the Iran nuclear deal, climate change, and the coronavirus pandemic. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is now joining us from the North Lawn of the White House in Washington, D.C. Jeremy, was the meeting in Geneva expected to last longer, and were there some issues that could not be taken up even though they were there on the table?
Yeah, so listen, this summit between President Biden and Vladimir Putin was obviously highly anticipated. There was a lot of preparation, weeks and months of preparation going into this meeting. And indeed, it did run shorter than expected. There was simply that one-on-one meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin alongside their secretaries of state, foreign minister on the Russian side. And then they had this larger meeting with 5 officials each on each side in addition to the respective presidents. And so it's clear that while they did cover a range of issues, at the end of the day, President Biden said, we looked at each other and we decided we didn't have much more to talk about. And that's because they are now tasking officials on each side to go into the details of some of the specific issues that were discussed. Okay. What's clear here ultimately is that what President Biden's mission was here with President Putin was not to come out with any kind of agreement. The expectations were pretty low here, and that was for President Biden to go into the meeting to make clear to the Russian president what the U.S.'s positions are on a range of issues, and also making clear what some of the U.S.'s red lines are, certain actions that they will no longer accept. That ranges from cyber actions, for example, to the treatment of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in prison, where President Biden made very clear that there would be serious consequences for Russia if he were to die in jail.
Jeremy, how has the meeting been received back in the U.S. by the Republican lawmakers, especially as Putin did draw comparisons between Biden and Trump?
Yeah, look, President Putin made very clear that this was a very different meeting than the one he had with former President Donald Trump back in Helsinki. He made clear that he got different answers from President Biden than he would have gotten from President Trump. The reaction from Republicans, we at least have a statement from Kevin McCarthy, the top Republican within the House of Representatives, and Congressman McCarthy is accusing President Biden of having taken a pass, given Vladimir Putin a pass on a range of Russian malign activities. That's pretty rich, of course, coming from Congressman McCarthy, who supported President Trump assiduously throughout his presidency. President Trump, of course, when he met with Vladimir Putin, not only did he give Putin a pass on behavior, but he actually sided with the Russian president over U.S. intelligence on its conclusions of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. So obviously President Biden was there to try and find a way to move forward constructively with the Russian president, but he obviously did not give him a pass on any of those behaviors, instead making very clear that the U.S. would not accept certain behaviors from the Russian government. One thing to make clear here is that President Biden has said He is not looking for a reset of U.S.-Russia relations, which is something that every American president over the last 2 decades has sought when coming into office. Instead, President Biden making very clear that he is looking for a predictable and rational relationship between the U.S. and Russia going forward. Again, it's very hard to see exactly what came of this meeting in its immediacy. This will be over the longer term to see whether this initial dialogue between these two leaders can lead to more constructive U.S.-Russia relations over the coming months and years.
Absolutely. Jeremy, many thanks for joining us with all those details. A quick check now of some more developments from around the globe in World in a Minute.
India has asked Pakistan to review a bill passed by the National Assembly to facilitate reviewing Kulbhushan Jadhav's case. Pakistan has been asked to address the shortcomings of the bill, saying the proposed law does not create a mechanism to reconsider it, as mandated by the International Court of Justice. Hungary's parliament has passed a legislation banning the dissemination of content in schools deemed to promote homosexuality and gender change, amid strong criticism from human rights groups and opposition parties. The Israeli military struck targets in Gaza twice this week after a continued barrage of incendiary balloons sparked 8 fires in southern Israel. June 19th, which commemorates the end of slavery in the United States, has now been declared a federal holiday. Juneteenth is the first one to be established since Martin Luther King Jr. Day in 1983. 4-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka has withdrawn from this year's Wimbledon, but is planning on returning at the Tokyo Olympics. It comes after world number 3 Rafael Nadal also announced he is pulling out of Wimbledon and the Tokyo Olympics.
That's it then for today. See you again next week. Bye-bye.